Do you remember those wild 1980s toys? The ones so dangerous it's a miracle we survived playing with them? Back then, toys weren't just games. They were explosions of color, chaos, and fearless imagination that defined every childhood afternoon. Looking at them now, were we brave or just lucky? Lawn darts were the kind of toy that made parents nervous for good reason. Marketed as a fun family game, they were basically long, heavy darts with pointed metal tips that you tossed into the air toward plastic rings on the ground. The idea was simple: hit the target, score a point, celebrate. The reality, though, was far from safe. Those darts could come down like miniature spears, embedding themselves in lawns, decks, and sometimes people. Families loved playing them at barbecues and backyard gatherings, and most assumed nothing bad could happen, until it did. Hospitals began reporting cases of serious head injuries and even deaths. In one tragic instance, a young boy was struck in the skull, leading to the nationwide outcry that finally got the toy pulled from shelves. Despite being banned, many households kept their sets hidden away, unable to part with the nostalgia. Looking back, it is almost unbelievable that something so lethal was once sold as harmless fun. It was a symbol of a fearless decade when danger and excitement often came in the same package. The Cabbage Patch Snack Time Kids doll was designed to be cute, interactive, and surprisingly hungry. Kids could feed it pretend snacks that disappeared into its mechanical mouth as the doll chewed with a quiet whirring sound. At first, it felt like magic, a toy that could eat on its own. But that magic quickly turned into horror for many children. The doll's motorized mouth had no off switch, and it did not know the difference between plastic food and real fingers. Countless kids learned that the hard way, getting their hair or fingertips caught in the doll's relentless jaws. Parents rushed to pull the batteries, but even that sometimes did not stop it. The manufacturer recalled the dolls after several injuries, but not before the Snack Time Kids had earned a spot in toy history for all the wrong reasons. Despite its creepy legacy, some collectors still keep them. A strange reminder of how wild 1980s toy innovation could be. The idea of a doll that eats might sound innocent, but when it starts chewing on you, the fun ends fast. The Battlestar Galactica missile-firing action figures were supposed to be every young sci-fi fan's dream come true. The toy line mirrored the excitement of the television show, with detailed spaceships and figures that could actually shoot small plastic missiles. Kids loved the realism, until that realism turned deadly. The missiles were small enough to fit into a child's mouth, and tragically, one boy choked to death after accidentally inhaling a projectile. That single event led to a massive recall and a permanent change in toy safety design. From that moment on, most manufacturers removed missile-launching features or made projectiles too large to swallow. At the time, though, parents were outraged that something marketed as safe had taken such a dark turn. The figures themselves became infamous collector's items, frozen in history as a symbol of the industry's recklessness. What started as a celebration of science fiction imagination ended with a harsh reality check about just how dangerous realistic play could become. Clackers were one of those toys that seemed harmless until you actually used them. 2 acrylic balls were attached to strings, and the goal was to swing them up and down in rhythm so they smacked together with a loud clack. Kids loved the sound and the challenge, spending hours perfecting the timing. Sometimes they would form small groups on driveways or at recess, each trying to master double or triple clacks while the others watched in awe. The plastic would heat from friction, adding an odd smell and a bit of smoke to the mix. But no one cared. It felt like an accomplishment. Even when their hands were sore and their wrists bruised, they kept going, determined to get that perfect sound. But anyone who owned a set knows what came next. Those plastic balls were made of hard, brittle material that could shatter under pressure. When they did, the pieces flew fast and sharp, right into faces, eyes, or walls. Parents tried to tape them up or replace them, but the danger was baked into the design. Eventually, schools and parents' groups began pushing for bans after a wave of injuries swept the country. Still, for many who grew up then, That loud rhythmic clicking brings back memories of hot summer afternoons and bruised knuckles. They were flashy, fun, and far too dangerous to survive the modern world. The Easy Bake Oven of the 1980s felt like pure independence in a box. With a tiny light bulb acting as the heat source, kids could bake small cakes and cookies all by themselves. It was marketed as a way to feel grown up, and it worked, maybe too well. Many kids used the oven to experiment, tossing in candy bars, crayons, or whatever was in the pantry just to see what would happen. The smell that filled the room was equal parts sugar and smoke, and parents would come running only to find melted chaos inside. Some kids even charged friends a few cents to taste test their creations, proudly serving up burned chocolate and half-cooked dough. The problem was those little ovens could get dangerously hot. Thousands of children burned their fingers or hands trying to pull out the metal pans, and some even ended up with serious blisters. There were no automatic shutoffs, and the compact design trapped heat in ways no one expected. Parents quickly realized the toy was more hazard than hobby. Later versions introduced safety doors and cooler heating elements, but by then, the damage to its reputation was done. The 1980s model still holds a nostalgic place in many hearts, but it also taught an entire generation a hard lesson. Sometimes being just like mom comes with a price. Slap bracelets were everywhere in the late 1980s. Classrooms, malls, playgrounds. Kids collected them by the dozen, showing off neon colors and wild patterns. The trick was simple. Snap the straight band against your wrist and watch it curl around perfectly. Some kids took it a step further, slapping them across backpacks, arms, and even faces in playful fights. The noise of a dozen bracelets snapping at once could fill an entire hallway, driving teachers insane. For a few glorious years, they were the ultimate symbol of rebellion, something that annoyed adults but made you instantly cool. But beneath that fabric lay a thin strip of sharp-edged metal. Over time, the covering wore down or tore, revealing the raw steel underneath. Soon, reports of cut wrists and sliced skin started pouring in. Some schools banned them outright, calling them distracting and dangerous. Still, the craze was unstoppable for a while. Every kid wanted to hear that satisfying snap, no matter how many warnings came from teachers or parents. They were the perfect mix of rebellion and style, a fashion statement that literally left its mark. The He-Man Power Sword turned every backyard into a battlefield. Inspired by the cartoon hero himself, the hard plastic sword was big, bright, and built for action. Every child who held it shouted, "I have the power!" usually before whacking a sibling or neighbor. There was a kind of magic in that sword, especially when paired with the He-Man action figures in Saturday morning reruns. Kids wore makeshift capes made from bath towels and staged epic battles in the yard, believing they were saving the universe. Of course, those heroic duels often ended with someone crying, a broken toy, and a lecture from an exhausted parent. The sword's tough design meant it could take a beating, but that also meant it delivered one. Black eyes, bruised arms, and a few broken lamps later, parents started realizing this toy might have been too realistic. The problem was not just the sword, it was the energy it unleashed in every kid who wielded it. The toy was eventually reworked with softer plastic, but by then, countless kids had already discovered their inner warrior and their parents' limits for patience. It remains one of the most iconic but dangerous toy weapons of the decade, symbolizing both the imagination and chaos that defined 1980s playtime. Moon shoes promised the dream of anti-gravity, a trampoline you could wear on your feet. Kids strapped them on and bounced across driveways, pretending they were astronauts. It was exciting, wild, and completely unpredictable. Friends would challenge each other to jump higher or run while wearing them, often ending in spectacular wipeouts. The sound of laughter mixed with the inevitable thud of someone hitting the ground was part of every moon shoe memory. Despite the danger, the feeling of defying gravity, even for a few seconds, was too tempting to resist. The rubber bands that provided the spring were unstable, snapping or slipping without warning. One wrong jump, and you were face first on the pavement. Sprained ankles, twisted knees, and a few broken noses were common battle scars. But that did not stop kids from begging for a pair every Christmas. The commercials made them look effortless, like floating on the moon, but in reality, it was like strapping chaos to your feet. The 1980s loved risk, and moon shoes captured that spirit perfectly. Part science fiction, part disaster waiting to happen. Pogo balls were the natural next step in the 1980s bounce craze. A rubber disc with a ball in the center, it required balance, coordination, and a healthy disregard for gravity. Kids gripped it with their shoes and jumped until they inevitably fell. Neighborhoods turned into outdoor arenas with kids daring each other to see who could bounce the longest or the highest. The pogo ball squeaked loudly with every jump, creating a rhythm that could be heard down the block. Eventually, that sound meant one of two things: someone was having the time of their life, or someone was about to crash. When it worked, it felt like flying. When it did not, it was an instant faceplant. The grip tore easily, sending kids sprawling onto concrete or grass. Broken wrists, scraped knees, and bruised chins became badges of honor. Schools banned them after too many recess injuries, but that only made them more appealing. Like so many toys of the decade, the pogo ball blurred the line between fun and danger. Looking back, it is amazing anyone survived childhood intact, and even more amazing that we still look back on it all with a smile. The skip-it was supposed to be harmless fun, a simple plastic ring around your ankle connected to a ball that spun as you jumped. The goal was to skip over it without tripping, counting rotations with each pass. It was the kind of toy that looked safe until it was not. Every playground had that one kid who took it too far, turning the skip-it into a competitive sport. The plastic ball would smack the pavement like a drum, echoing across recess while lines of kids waited for their turn. It was all fun until someone missed a jump, tripped, and landed hard, usually to the sound of laughter before the nurse was called. The hard plastic ball could easily clip ankles, shins, or even teeth if things went wrong. Many kids learned the pain of getting tangled mid-swing, tumbling onto the pavement in tears. Despite the bruises, it became a playground favorite, with competitions to see who could skip it the longest. Teachers grew tired of the chaos, and some schools banned it outright. Still, its catchy jingle and simple design made it unforgettable. The skip-it may have been dangerous, but it was also pure 1980s energy, loud, competitive, and just a little bit reckless. Super elastic bubble plastic was one of those toys that looked like pure fun on television commercials but came with an invisible danger no one saw coming. Sold in colorful tubes, the goo could be squeezed out and blown into shimmering, wobbly balloons using a small plastic straw. It was mesmerizing, the texture, the smell, the rainbow sheen. Kids would sit for hours blowing one bubble after another, trying to make them bigger and more perfect than before. But hidden in that sweet-smelling goo was a cocktail of chemicals, including solvents that released toxic fumes. The smell that made children dizzy with excitement was actually the odor of danger. Parents often complained of headaches, and a few unlucky kids found out the hard way that the mixture was also highly flammable. Many homes banned it after near misses with open flames or gas stoves. Still, its appeal was undeniable, and it remained a favorite in countless toy boxes until authorities caught up with the risks. In hindsight, it was the kind of toy that perfectly summed up the 1980s. Bright, bold, creative, and just a little too close to catastrophe. Creepy crawlers. Thingmaker sets gave kids the thrill of feeling like real inventors, or maybe mad scientists. The concept was simple. Pour liquid plastic into metal molds, heat it up, and watch colorful bugs and creatures take shape. The problem? The molds were scorching hot, and the liquid plastic reached dangerously high temperatures. The entire set came with little safety beyond parental supervision and a brave spirit. Many kids ended up with minor burns, and a few had far worse injuries. Still, that smell of melted plastic and the thrill of pulling a perfect worm from the mold was unforgettable. Parents called it creativity. Safety officials called it negligence. Eventually, the manufacturer redesigned the toy with safer heating systems, but by then, the original had already earned its place as a legend among risky 1980s crafts. Looking back, it is shocking that anyone thought a 400-degree mold belonged in a child's bedroom. But then again, that was part of the charm of growing up in an era where danger and imagination were inseparable. Shrinky Dinks were marketed as a harmless art project, a way for kids to draw, color, and then watch their creations magically shrink into hard plastic charms. What no one mentioned at first was that the original versions came with serious hazards. Early Shrinky Dinks required baking in standard home ovens, and as they heated, they released fumes from the plastic sheets that were far from healthy. Kids often pressed their faces close to the oven door, noses nearly touching the glass, to watch their designs twist and curl like magic. The transformation was hypnotic, bright markers darkening, edges curling, and colors deepening into perfect little trinkets. For a few glorious minutes, the entire kitchen smelled like excitement and chemical vapor, and no one thought twice about it. The smell was sharp and unmistakable, filling kitchens with a chemical tang that left many parents concerned. Kids huddled around the oven door to watch the transformation, unaware that they were breathing in harmful gases. While no major disasters were widely reported, growing concern about fumes and burns forced manufacturers to redesign the product with safer materials and methods. Despite the risk, Shrinky Dinks became an icon of 1980s crafting, a mix of creativity, danger, and instant gratification. The thrill of watching your artwork warp, curl, and harden into something permanent was unforgettable, even if it came with a dose of toxic nostalgia. The toy chemistry sets of the 1980s were not the watered-down, safe versions you see today. Back then, they were miniature laboratories filled with real acids, flammable powders, and unmarked mystery chemicals. For a generation raised on curiosity and chaos, they were irresistible. Kitchens turned into science labs, and basements filled with smoke as kids tested experiments that often went wrong. Parents discovered scorched countertops, blackened test tubes, and half-melted spoons left behind in the name of science. Some kids proudly created small explosions, convinced they were future geniuses, while their mothers screamed from upstairs to stop making that smell. Kids mixed, boiled, and ignited all sorts of concoctions, often inside their bedrooms. Instructions encouraged experimentation, sometimes even hinting at reactions that produced fire or smoke. The danger was part of the appeal. There were countless reports of burns, ruined carpets, and explosions that sent families running for the garden hose. Yet these kits also inspired many future scientists who credit those reckless experiments for sparking their curiosity. Eventually, regulations forced toy makers to strip the sets of anything remotely hazardous, turning them into safe but boring science-light boxes. The old chemistry sets may have been risky, but for the daring kids of the 1980s, they were proof that discovery often came with a little danger and a lot of smoke. Aqua Dots were a toy that promised endless creativity with just a few drops of water, but they became infamous for an entirely different reason. The tiny, colorful beads could be arranged into shapes and designs, and when sprayed with water, they stuck together magically. Kids loved how simple and satisfying it was. Many children turned their kitchen tables into art studios, proudly crafting hearts, stars, and animals that shimmered like candy. The bright colors and glossy texture made them irresistible, even to toddlers who were too young to play safely. Parents praised the toys' creativity at first, never imagining that the harmless beads could turn into something so dangerous. But soon after their release, reports emerged that children were falling sick after swallowing the beads. Tests revealed that the coating contained a compound that turned toxic inside the body, producing a chemical similar to a date-rape drug. Panic spread quickly among parents, and the product was pulled from store shelves worldwide. For many families, it was a wake-up call about how even the most innocent-looking toy could hide a sinister danger. The recall was massive, and Aqua Dots became a symbol of the dark side of 1980s-style creativity, colorful, exciting, and completely reckless. What was meant to be an art toy ended up in the history books as one of the most shocking product failures of the decade. The CSI Fingerprint Kit was marketed as the ultimate science toy for curious minds. Inspired by television detectives and forensic heroes, it let kids dust for fingerprints using real powders and brushes. It sounded educational, even sophisticated. But in one of the most jaw-dropping toy scandals of the era, those fingerprint powders were later found to contain asbestos. Parents were horrified to learn that the same material linked to lung disease and cancer was in their children's hands and floating through their playrooms. Lawsuits followed, and the kit was swiftly pulled from stores, but the damage to trust was lasting. It was the kind of oversight that could only happen in a time when regulation had not yet caught up with innovation. Ironically, a toy designed to teach kids about solving crimes ended up being one of the biggest safety crimes of all. Even today, the story of the asbestos fingerprint kit remains one of the strangest examples of how 1980s ambition often ran far ahead of common sense. Polly Pocket was every child's dream, a tiny world that fit right in the palm of your hand. Each compact case opened to reveal a miniature dollhouse or playland, filled with tiny furniture and even tinier dolls. It was charming, portable, and imaginative. But the small size that made Polly Pocket so special was also what made it dangerous. The miniature accessories were easy to lose, and even easier to swallow. Toddlers especially found the colorful pieces irresistible, leading to choking hazards and emergency room visits. Despite safety concerns, Polly Pocket became one of the most beloved toys of the late 1980s and early 1990s, its tiny charm impossible to resist. Manufacturers later redesigned the toy to make pieces larger and safer, but purists say it was never the same. For those who grew up with the original, Polly Pocket represented both the beauty and the peril of 1980s play, small, delicate, and just a little bit dangerous. Pound puppies were the stuffed animals everyone wanted to rescue and take home. With their droopy eyes and soft fur, they were designed to tug at your heartstrings. Parents loved that they taught kids empathy and responsibility, until reports surfaced about an unexpected danger. The problem was in the hard plastic eyes, which were poorly secured and prone to popping off. For toddlers, those small pieces became choking hazards in an instant. Several incidents led to recalls and redesigns, with softer, stitched-on eyes replacing the hard ones. Despite the scare, pound puppies remained beloved, a symbol of comfort during the bright chaos of the 1980s. They were innocent, cuddly, and full of nostalgia, even if they came with a side of hazard. For many families, the memory of falling asleep with one still outweighs the fear that once surrounded them. The danger faded, but the affection never did. Magnetic building sets were the kind of toy that made kids feel like engineers. With tiny magnets inside colorful rods and metal balls, you could build towers, bridges, and geometric shapes that defied gravity. The concept was brilliant, until those tiny magnets started falling out. When swallowed, multiple magnets could attract inside the intestines, pinching and tearing through tissue. Doctors called the injuries horrific, and emergency surgeries skyrocketed. Parents who once saw the sets as educational now viewed them as silent threats. Eventually, stricter safety standards forced toy companies to redesign magnetic parts completely, sealing them away from small hands. Even so, these sets remain infamous reminders that some of the most fascinating toys also carried hidden dangers. They captured the 1980s perfectly, creative, intelligent, and just a little too risky for comfort. Toy cap guns were a staple of every 1980s backyard. They came in shiny metal finishes that looked shockingly real, complete with loud pops of smoke when you pulled the trigger. For generations, they symbolized adventure and imagination. But in the 1980s, realism went too far. The metal look was so convincing that police officers began mistaking the toy for actual firearms. Several tragic incidents occurred when children or teens were confronted while playing, leading to national outrage and urgent calls for regulation. Orange tips were later added to distinguish toy guns from real ones, but the damage had been done. What was once harmless play had turned deadly serious. The cap gun debate became one of the most emotional toy controversies of the decade, forcing America to question how far realism should go in the name of fun. It was a sobering reminder that some games can blur the line between fantasy and danger far too easily. The Voltron lion toys were the ultimate symbol of 1980s cool. Made from solid die-cast metal, these collectible robot lions snapped together to form one giant shining mech warrior that felt indestructible in your hands. The weight alone made it feel powerful, like a toy made for champions. But that same weight and those sharp, unpolished edges also made it a serious hazard. The lion's fangs, claws, and wing pieces could easily slice skin or bruise fingers, and when fully assembled, the towering Voltron figure could topple over like a wrecking ball. Many kids learned the hard way that dropping one on their foot or swinging it in a living room battle left real injuries behind. Parents complained about chipped furniture, scratched floors, and black eyes. Still, for children of the 1980s, the danger was part of the magic. The toy's toughness matched the show's intensity, and every scrape felt like a badge of honor. It was banned and redesigned after too many reports of injuries, replaced with lighter plastic versions that lost some of their dangerous charm. Even today, collectors still hunt for the original metal editions, admiring their quality, and quietly remembering the bruises that came with them. It was the kind of toy that could transform your imagination, your day, and sometimes, unfortunately, your trip to the emergency room. The Slinky was one of those timeless toys that seemed impossible to mess up until you took it to the stairs. The metal Slinky, shiny and hypnotic, looked innocent enough sitting in its box. Kids would set it on the top step, give it a nudge, and watch it tumble gracefully downward, bouncing in rhythm. But that grace often turned violent when the toy recoiled too fast or got tangled mid-fall. The tightly coiled metal could whip back at lightning speed, snapping wrists, catching fingers, or even smacking a face hard enough to leave welts. Many children learned to duck the moment it started to misfire, but by then, it was usually too late. The toy also had a habit of tangling itself into impossible knots, leading frustrated kids to pull at the sharp coils until they cut their hands. Despite the hazards, the Slinky remained a household favorite, even as parents quietly cursed its unpredictable nature. Plastic versions eventually replaced the metal ones, but they never had the same bounce or the same sense of risk. The metal Slinky taught an entire generation one unforgettable lesson. Even the simplest toy could turn into a weapon when gravity got involved. Stretch Armstrong was a marvel of toy engineering, a rubbery superhero who could be pulled, twisted, and stretched to absurd lengths before snapping back into shape. Kids loved testing his limits, often racing to see who could stretch him the farthest without breaking him. The original was fairly sturdy, filled with a dense corn syrup-like gel that made him heavy but oddly satisfying to tug. Then came the knockoffs, cheap imitations that looked the same but were filled with mysterious goo that was anything but safe. Some of these versions would burst open after too much stretching, oozing out a foul-smelling liquid that burned skin and stained carpets. No one really knew what was inside, but it was enough to send panicked parents grabbing paper towels and calling poison control. Others simply fell apart after a few days, their rubber skins tearing or leaking through seams. Despite the mess and mystery, kids adored them for the sheer fun of destruction. There was something about seeing what was inside that was almost irresistible. By the time regulators caught up and many of these knockoffs were banned, the damage was already done, literally and figuratively. Stretch Armstrong may have been about flexibility, but his imitators proved that cutting corners can snap back harder than any stretch ever could. Play-Doh's Fuzzy Pumper Barbershop sounded like a dream for every young stylist. You could sit your colorful plastic character in the chair, load Play-Doh into its head, and push down on the lever to make bright, squishy hair sprout through little holes. It was creative, funny, and satisfying, until the mechanism jammed. When the extruder clogged, the only way to fix it was to dig into the small plastic openings with your fingers, which often led to pinches, cuts, or worse, fingers getting stuck. The problem got so bad that parents had to pry the toy apart with butter knives or screwdrivers just to free it. The lever also had enough force to catch skin if pressed carelessly, leaving little hands red and sore. Despite the chaos, the toy became one of the decade's most recognizable playsets, cementing its place in the hall of both fame and infamy. Later redesigns made it safer and easier to clean, but they also lost that tactile weirdness that made the original so iconic. Even now, those who grew up with it can almost feel the squish of Play-Doh in their palms and hear that soft click of the lever, a sound that meant fun was about to turn into frustration. The Fuzzy Pumper taught every kid an early truth: creativity could be messy and sometimes painful too. The Slip and Slide was one of those perfect summer toys, simple, cheap, and endlessly fun. All you needed was a patch of grass, a hose, and the courage to run full speed into a slick sheet of water. Kids could spend entire afternoons racing, sliding, and laughing in the sun. For children, it was harmless. But for adults who decided to join in, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The design was made for smaller, lighter bodies, and once grown-ups started throwing themselves down the slide, the results were catastrophic. Several adults were paralyzed or severely injured after hitting the ground too hard or stopping abruptly mid-slide. The company quickly issued warnings, plastering boxes with disclaimers that read, "For children only," but the damage was already done. Despite the danger, the Slip and Slide remained a summer staple, symbolizing both the freedom and recklessness of childhood. There was something pure about it, just water, plastic, and joy, until someone got hurt. It perfectly captured the spirit of the 1980s. Unfiltered fun with a hint of danger and a belief that nothing could go wrong. Looking back, the Slip and Slide feels like the ultimate metaphor for the era itself. Fast, thrilling, a little careless, and impossible to forget. Toy soldier grenades with firecrackers inside were every parent's worst nightmare disguised as innocent playthings. These looked like small plastic grenades, the kind kids tossed around during backyard war games. But instead of just being props, they came loaded with actual firecrackers inside. You twisted the top, pulled a string, or struck a match to set them off, then hurled them across the yard for a loud bang. The thrill was undeniable. Kids loved the sound, the smoke, and the chaos of pretend battles. But these toys were literally small explosives, and they caused burns, fires, and injuries more times than anyone could count. Parents watched in horror as kids lit fuses with matches, held on too long, or threw them in the wrong direction. In many cases, the grenades shattered on impact, sending bits of plastic flying dangerously close to eyes and skin. Schools, neighborhoods, and eventually regulators moved quickly to ban them, labeling them as outright hazards. Still, for the kids who got to play with them, they were unforgettable. The ultimate blend of pretend soldier games and real-life fireworks. Today, they are remembered as one of the funniest yet scariest examples of how far toy makers once pushed the limits of fun. Slap bracelets looked innocent enough, just colorful fabric bands covered in neon designs, waiting to curl around your wrist. You straightened the metal strip inside, gave it a smack against your arm, and snap! It coiled tightly in place with a satisfying smack. On the playground, it was like a fashion statement and a game rolled into one. Kids collected dozens in wild patterns, zebra stripes, holographic sparkles, cartoon prints, and traded them like baseball cards. But underneath that thin fabric was a sharp metal spring just waiting to cause trouble. As the covers wore down, the metal started poking through, cutting wrists and scratching skin in ways nobody expected from a fun accessory. Teachers quickly banned them from classrooms, partly because of the injuries and partly because kids spent more time slapping bracelets than paying attention. Parents called them dangerous. Kids just called them awesome. The sting of a well-placed slap was part of the appeal. It was jewelry with an attitude. Even though they were pulled off shelves, slap bracelets remain one of the most iconic 1990s fads. Looking back, they were equal parts stylish and hazardous, which pretty much sums up the decade itself. Slinky Dog was the awkward cousin of the classic Slinky. Instead of just a metal spring, this toy had a plastic dog's head and tail connected by a slinky for a torso. You could tug it along on little wheels, and the body would stretch and bounce in a comically wobbly way. Kids often treated Slinky Dog like a real pet, dragging it around the house as if it were alive. The spring body made it unpredictable. It might stretch smoothly one minute, then suddenly tangle itself into a hopeless knot the next. Parents spent more time untangling Slinky Dogs than kids did playing with them, but the goofy charm always won out. Kids loved pulling it around, even though the slinky body had a bad habit of getting tangled. The spring could twist, bend, or even snap if stretched too far, leading to a very sad, droopy dog. Still, its goofy charm made it a staple of toy collections. Long before it became famous in the Toy Story movies, Slinky Dog was a weird, wonderful invention that turned a simple spring into a character. Gas-powered model airplanes were one of the most thrilling toys of the 1960s, but also one of the riskiest. These were not battery-operated plastic planes. They were small but fully functional models powered by real gasoline engines. Kids fueled them up, pulled starter cords, and watched them roar into flight. The sound and smell were unforgettable, like having a miniature motorcycle in your hands. But the risks were obvious. The spinning propellers were sharp enough to slice fingers, and the gasoline posed fire hazards if spilled or mishandled. Kids often tried to start them without supervision, leading to accidents and emergency room visits. Parents found themselves dealing with burns, cuts, and the occasional runaway plane crashing into neighbors' yards. Despite the dangers, the planes were wildly popular, offering a sense of realism no battery-operated toy could match. Eventually, they were restricted and replaced with safer versions, but for the kids who grew up with them, nothing matched the thrill of launching a roaring gas-powered plane into the sky. Creepy crawlers. Thingmaker ovens were both brilliant and absurd. Kids were given little metal molds, bottles of goo called Plasti-Goop, and a miniature oven powered by a real hot plate. You squirted the goop into the mold, slid it into the oven, and waited while it baked into rubbery bugs, worms, and other gross creatures. The smell alone was unforgettable, a sharp, plasticky odor that filled the kitchen and made parents shake their heads. Every kid who owned one ended up with at least one burn mark as a badge of honor, and yet the danger only added to the thrill, because it felt like you were doing something you were not supposed to. The results were oddly satisfying. Colorful little critters you could collect, trade, or use to scare your sister. But the process? Pure chaos. The ovens got dangerously hot, the fumes smelled like burning plastic, and more than a few kids burned their fingers trying to peek too soon. Parents called it unsafe, but kids loved the mix of science experiment and gross-out factor. The toys had a way of making you feel like a mad scientist, cooking up monsters in your own lab. Despite the danger, creepy crawlers became a cult classic, a perfect example of the 1990s approach to toys. If it looked fun, a little fire hazard was no big deal. Lightbrite was one of the most creative toys of the 1980s. You got a light-up board, little plastic pegs in every color of the rainbow, and black paper templates with outlines to follow. Stick the pegs through the paper into the glowing board, and suddenly you had a glowing picture of a clown, a house, or whatever you wanted to design. Kids would sit in the dark, mesmerized by their glowing creations, proudly showing them off to parents as if they had just invented neon art. The pegs themselves became tiny treasures, sorted into jars or scattered under couches where they would later be found by bare feet. Even the smell of the warm light bulb became part of the memory, a faint scent that clung to every Lightbrite session. The satisfying click of the peg sliding into place was half the fun, and seeing the picture light up was pure magic. The downside? Losing pegs constantly, stepping on them barefoot, or running out of black paper sheets and having to wing it. And of course, the light bulb inside always seemed to burn out at the worst possible time. But when it worked, Lightbrite turned any dark room into an art studio, and for kids in the 1980s, it felt like creating neon masterpieces. Cabbage Patch Snack Time kids were the dolls that proved even cute toys could be unintentionally terrifying. These dolls were designed to eat plastic food, with a battery-powered mouth that pulled the pieces in and swallowed them into a little backpack. On paper, it sounded fun. Your doll could actually have a meal with you. In practice, it got a little scary. The motorized mouth did not stop at plastic food. It grabbed hair, fingers, and clothing too, and once it started chewing, it would not let go. Parents quickly realized this was less adorable snack time and more miniature horror show. Still, the dolls sold well because they combined the Cabbage Patch Kids' trademark cuteness with an interactive gimmick. Kids loved the idea of playing mom or dad while feeding their doll, even if it occasionally ended in tears when the doll decided to eat something it should not. Looking back, it is amazing these ever made it to shelves, but in the 1980s, toy companies were willing to try almost anything. Children's chemistry kits with cyanide compounds sound like an urban legend, but they were very real in the 1960s. Marketed as junior science labs, these kits came with test tubes, beakers, powders, and liquids for at-home experiments. Kids could mix acids, test pH levels, and create small chemical reactions right at the kitchen table. It seemed educational, futuristic, and impressive. But the truth was disturbing. Some kits contained genuinely hazardous substances, including cyanide salts, which were labeled only with small warnings and left in the hands of unsupervised children. The instructions encouraged kids to mix chemicals freely, often without gloves, masks, or any protective equipment. Parents thought they were buying educational fun, but what they were really doing was handing their children miniature poison labs. Reports of burns, poisonings, and toxic fumes became impossible to ignore, and regulators eventually cracked down. Still, for the kids who grew up with them, chemistry kits were unforgettable. They made you feel like a scientist, even if the risk was sky high. Today, they stand as one of the wildest examples of how far the 1960s pushed the idea of learning through play. Yo-yo water balls were the definition of a playground craze that went too far. They were squishy, liquid-filled balls attached to stretchy cords that you swung around like a yo-yo. At first, they felt amazing, cold, squishy, bouncy, and endlessly fidget-worthy. Kids smacked them against the ground, walls, or their own hands, laughing at the splat-like bounce. But the longer they stuck around, the more obvious the hazards became. The stretchy cords were long enough to wrap around kids' necks, raising serious strangulation concerns that had parents panicking. On top of that, the liquid inside was rumored to be some kind of questionable chemical, and if the ball burst, the mystery slime oozed everywhere. Teachers banned them from schools almost instantly, and many were pulled from toy aisles after safety warnings spread. Still, for a brief shining moment, yo-yo water balls were the coolest thing to dangle from your backpack. They were weird, they were risky, and they perfectly captured the chaotic energy of 1990s playground toys. Rock'em Sock'em robots were as noisy as they were fun. Two plastic boxers, one red and one blue, stood in a miniature ring controlled by buttons you smashed with both hands. Each punch made their heads jerk and rattle until, bam, a well-placed hit sent one fighter's head popping up in defeat. The battles rarely lasted long, but kids always demanded a rematch, slamming buttons harder with each round. The sound of clicking plastic became a soundtrack for sibling rivalry, echoing through living rooms across the country. Even adults sometimes joined in, turning what started as a kid's toy into an impromptu family tournament. The fights were fast, loud, and usually ended with kids slamming buttons so hard the whole ring shook. The plastic-on-plastic clatter could fill a living room in seconds, making it less of a quiet game and more of a sporting event. But that was the point. Rock'em Sock'em robots turned playtime into a brawl, complete with cheers, groans, and rematches. It was pure 1980s toy joy, simple, mechanical, and endlessly competitive. My pet monster was one of those toys that confused adults but thrilled kids. At first glance, it was just a stuffed animal, a big, blue, fuzzy creature with horns and a goofy grin. But then you noticed the giant plastic handcuffs snapped around its wrists. The idea was that this monster had been captured, and now it was your job to befriend it and keep it under control. The handcuffs were bright orange and chunky, with a snap mechanism that could really lock. So kids used them not just on the toy, but also on themselves, their siblings, or even the family dog. It was cute, but also a little disturbing. Why did this monster have to be restrained? That question did not matter to kids. What mattered was that it looked tough while still being huggable, and it felt like owning a creature from your own Saturday morning cartoon lineup. My Pet Monster even had its own television show, further cementing its place in 1980s pop culture. For kids, it was the perfect balance of scary and silly, a reminder that monsters could be friends as long as they were chained up with bright orange cuffs. Mini hammocks without spreaders were sold in the 1960s as fun backyard loungers for kids, but they turned into a nightmare. Unlike adult hammocks, these were narrow, net-style hammocks without wooden spreader bars to keep the net open. That meant they collapsed inward as soon as weight was applied. Kids climbed in, only to find themselves tangled in the netting. The biggest hazard came when their heads slipped through the loose weave. Dozens of cases reported strangulation accidents as kids became trapped when the hammock twisted shut around their necks. Parents quickly realized the danger, and tragic reports led to recalls and bans. Still, for the kids who had them, they were oddly fun. You felt like you had your own little hideaway, even if it was risky. Today, mini hammocks without spreaders stand as one of the strangest banned products of the 1960s, a reminder that even something as innocent as a hammock can become deadly without proper design. The Super Soaker CPS 2000 was the holy grail of backyard warfare in the 1990s. Forget little squirt guns. This thing was a pressurized beast that fired water streams so powerful they could knock a kid off their feet. It looked more like military equipment than a toy, with a giant reservoir tank and a pump that built insane pressure. The first time you fired it, you understood why playground legends claimed it could break windows. Some parents even complained the spray stung skin at close range, like getting hit with a miniature fire hose. Kids, of course, loved that about it. The CPS 2000 gave you instant dominance in any water fight. You could soak friends across the yard, drench bullies from a safe distance, or unleash chaos at the pool. The only downside was its weight. Lugging the tank around felt like carrying a small backpack full of water. But that did not matter. Owning one meant you were top dog of summer battles. Eventually, concerns about safety led to changes in design, and the CPS 2000 was quietly retired. Still, anyone who ever wielded one remembers the sheer power of being a pint-sized firefighter in their own backyard. Pogo Ball was one of those toys that looked simple but turned into pure chaos once you tried it. It was basically a rubber ball trapped inside a plastic platform, like a cross between a pogo stick and a spaceship. You stood on the platform, squeezed the ball between your feet, and tried to bounce. The commercials showed kids sailing through the air like it was effortless fun, but in reality, most people ended up wobbling, falling, or scraping their knees on the driveway. The ball gave it just enough instability to make every bounce feel like a gamble. That did not stop kids from trying over and over again. Friends would time each other to see who could last the longest, or who could bounce the highest before toppling over. It was a mix of toy and dare, something you played with knowing full well you might get hurt. For many kids, mastering the Pogo Ball felt like conquering a personal Everest, even if most attempts ended in laughter and a few bruises. Stretch Armstrong was a superhero toy unlike any other. Instead of hard plastic, his body was made of thick rubber filled with a mysterious goo that let you stretch him to impossible lengths. You could pull his arms across the room, twist his legs into knots, or stretch him between two kids like a tug-of-war rope. Every kid tested his limits, wondering just how far he could go before something gave way. When he finally leaked, it felt like discovering forbidden knowledge, the secret of what really lived inside Stretch Armstrong's skin. For many, that first tear was both horrifying and thrilling, a rite of passage that proved you had pushed the toy beyond its design. Slowly, he would snap back into shape, at least most of the time. The goo inside was rumored to be some kind of corn syrup-like substance, which made the toy sticky and a little unsettling if it ever leaked. Parents hated when he tore, but kids saw that goo as proof of his weird, stretchy magic. Stretch Armstrong was a perfect mix of superhero fantasy and scientific oddity, making him one of the strangest and most beloved toys of the 1980s. Creepy crawlers. Original hot plate sets were every kid's dream and every parent's nightmare. The idea was simple. Fill a metal mold with bottles of goo called Plastigoop. Place it onto a miniature oven powered by an actual heating element and watch as it baked into rubbery bugs, worms, and other creepy creatures. Kids loved the gross results. Collectible critters perfect for pranks, trades, or scaring siblings. But the process of making them? That was dangerous. The ovens got blistering hot, reaching over 300 degrees, and kids stuck their fingers in constantly to check if their bugs were done. More than a few walked away with burned skin, melted carpet squares, and fumes strong enough to make eyes water. Parents complained, but the truth is, kids loved it precisely because it felt like a science experiment gone wrong. The sizzling smell of cooking plastic-filled kitchens, and the danger only made the final results feel cooler. The 1960s version had virtually no safety guards, no protective covers, and no timers, just a hot plate sitting on your counter waiting for accidents to happen. Later decades saw safer re-releases, but the original Creepy Crawlers kit became infamous as the kind of toy that could only exist in an era where danger was brushed aside as part of the fun. For kids, it was thrilling. For parents, it was terrifying. No wonder the original was eventually banned. Gak-splat balls were every parent's nightmare disguised as a toy. They looked like harmless, goo-filled stress balls, squishy, sticky, and fun to throw at walls. The packaging promised they would splat, stick, and peel right off, ready to go again. And for the first few throws, they actually did. Then, reality set in. These things quickly picked up dirt, hair, and dust, turning them into gross lint bombs that smeared more than they stuck. Worse, they eventually exploded, either on impact or just from overuse. Suddenly, neon goo was dripping down your bedroom wall, staining the paint and seeping into the carpet. Parents groaned while kids laughed, treating every busted Gak-splat ball like a badge of honor. The sticky residue seemed impossible to clean, no matter how many times you scrubbed. Still, the memory of throwing one at the ceiling and watching it cling there until gravity finally peeled it off is burned into every 90s kid's brain. They were messy, gross, and short-lived, but unforgettable. Weebles were one of those toys that came with a catchphrase you could not forget. Weebles wobble, but they do not fall down. These egg-shaped figures had weighted bottoms that made them pop back upright no matter how hard you pushed them over. They came in all sorts of costumes: clowns, astronauts, farmers, and usually had little playsets like houses or cars. The joy came from pushing them down as hard as possible, only to watch them bounce back upright with stubborn determination. Parents loved them because they were nearly indestructible, and kids loved them because they seemed alive in their own silly way. Even when a Weeble got a little scratched or dented, it only added to its charm. Proof that it had survived countless rounds of wobbling chaos. Kids loved knocking them around, watching them roll and spin before bouncing upright again. The promise was that they did not fall down, but every kid knew stepping on one or smashing it too hard against the floor could prove otherwise. They were simple, indestructible fun, until someone left them scattered around the room like landmines. Still, Weebles were the kind of toy you could play with endlessly without ever needing instructions, batteries, or a plan. They were silly, durable, and absolutely unforgettable. Jungle gyms on concrete were the definition of 1960s playground danger. Forget mulch, rubber mats, or soft landing zones. Back then, your jungle gym was bolted straight into blacktop, or, if you were lucky, packed dirt. These towering steel structures looked like fun climbing cages, daring kids to scale as high as possible. But the higher you went, the harder the fall. Broken arms, chipped teeth, and scraped knees were practically a rite of passage, and kids wore those injuries like badges of honor. Parents rarely hovered nearby. They just shrugged when kids came home covered in bruises. The bars themselves were blisteringly hot in summer, freezing cold in winter, and often rusty from years of wear. Still, nothing compared to the thrill of reaching the very top and looking down on the whole playground like a king or queen. Safety standards simply were not part of the equation, and the jungle gym became both a source of pride and a constant hazard. Eventually, regulations demanded softer surfaces, padded materials, and lower structures. But for those who grew up in the 1960s, the memory of hanging from monkey bars over solid concrete is equal parts terrifying and hilarious. It is the kind of playground hazard that could only exist in that era. Moon shoes promised to turn every kid into an astronaut by letting them bounce like they were walking on the moon. In reality, they were plastic platforms with bungee cords stretched across, strapped onto your sneakers with Velcro. You wobbled onto them, took a few awkward hops, and immediately realized you were in trouble. The commercials showed kids bouncing gracefully across lawns. In real life, most kids looked like newborn giraffes trying to stand for the first time. Twisted ankles, scraped knees, and faceplants were practically guaranteed within the first 5 minutes of play. But that did not stop the excitement of trying them out. Kids loved the idea of having their own personal trampolines on their feet, even if it meant constant wipeouts. Parents hated them for both the danger and the noise. Every hop sent a thunderous clunk through the house if you dared use them indoors. Despite the injuries, moon shoes became a must-try fad, a weird combination of futuristic promise and guaranteed pain. They may not have launched anyone into space, but they certainly launched a lot of kids straight into the grass. Big wheel trikes were the kings of the sidewalk in the 1980s. Unlike the shiny chrome bikes with their training wheels, the big wheel was loud, low, and made entirely of hard plastic. The oversized front wheel and tiny back wheels gave kids the feeling of being race car drivers, even though they were barely a foot off the ground. The signature move, that screeching spin out, pedal hard, yank the handlebars, and skid sideways in a way that made you feel like Evel Knievel. Of course, all that skidding meant the thin plastic wheels wore flat in no time, creating that thunk, thunk, thunk sound as you rode down the street. Parents swore they could hear a big wheel coming from 3 blocks away. They were built to be indestructible, but that did not stop kids from testing the limits, racing down steep driveways, crashing into curbs, or attempting tricks that always ended with scraped knees. The seats were adjustable, so the trike grew with you, but every kid eventually outgrew theirs physically before ever being ready to give it up emotionally. Owning a big wheel was a rite of passage, a declaration that you were ready for speed, freedom, and neighborhood bragging rights. Even today, adults look back at their big wheel days with equal parts pride and amazement that they survived those reckless rides. Playground seesaws without safety stops were a special kind of chaos. Kids would climb on opposite ends of a long wooden plank and take turns bouncing each other up and down. Sounds innocent, right? Not in the 1960s. Without rubber stoppers or any sort of safety mechanism, each bounce sent one kid slamming into the ground with bone-rattling force. It was less like play and more like a physics experiment in controlled violence. The heavier kid always had the advantage, sending the lighter kid airborne before slamming them down like a sack of potatoes. Sometimes, a prankster would jump off mid-ride, leaving the other kid to crash painfully to the ground. Teachers yelled, parents warned, but kids lined up anyway, eager for another round of punishment disguised as fun. Splinters, bruises, and sometimes worse were inevitable, yet kids could not get enough of the adrenaline rush. Modern seesaws now have springs and padded stops, but they lack the raw, dangerous thrill of the originals. Looking back, it is hard not to laugh at how much joy came from what was essentially an accident machine bolted to the playground. Aqua Dots were the ultimate craft toy gone wrong. The beads came in dozens of bright colors, and kids used templates to create patterns on plastic boards. A spritz of water fused them together, leaving behind keychains, shapes, and art to proudly show off. The excitement came from watching those tiny beads magically harden into real creations. It felt like alchemy for kids. Parents praised them as a miracle toy because cleanup was easy and projects looked impressive without glue or glitter everywhere. For a while, they seemed like the perfect blend of fun and wholesome creativity. At first, parents thought they were genius. Simple, creative, and less messy than paint or clay. But then the news broke. The chemical coating on Aqua Dots turned toxic inside the body, metabolizing into a substance similar to a date rape drug if swallowed. Suddenly, this harmless craft kit was making national headlines. Beads were recalled, lawsuits followed, and horrified parents swept them out of toy boxes forever. Still, kids remembered them as the magic beads that turned into danger overnight. Looking back, it is wild how something meant to encourage creativity ended up on the banned list. If these wild 1980s toys brought back memories and maybe a few bruises, tell us which one you survived in the comments, hit that like button like it's a slap bracelet, and subscribe so you never miss another trip through the dangerously fun past.